Sarah Orne Jewett was born in 1849. The American novelist and short story writer was born in the coastal town of Southbrook, Maine, into an old New England family. Her parents were Theodore Herman Jewett and Caroline Frances Jewett. Sarah was the middle sister of 3 children. She had 1 older sister and 1 younger sister. She was born, raised, and died in a house that her grandfather had bought. Her father gave her some encouraging admonition that shaped her aesthetic goals as a writer. Don't try to write about things. Write about things themselves. Jewett was often taken by her physician father on visits to the fishermen and farmers of her native Maine. She developed a deep and abiding love of their way of life and of the sights and sounds of her surroundings. These experiences and reading in her family's ample library formed the bulk of her education. She graduated in 1865 from Miss Olive Rain's school in South Berwick. She considered her schooling insignificant compared with the learning she gained on her own. At age 19, she published her first important story in the Atlantic Monthly and continued to publish many more stories in the Riverside Magazine for the Young, which she did under the pseudonym A.C. Elliott or Alice. Jewett never married, but she established a strong relationship with a woman named Annie Fields. Their acquaintance turned into a 30-year liaison. Their correspondence quickly became affectionately intimate. The 2 women's commitment to each other began in the early 1880s, and in 1881, Fields' husband died and the 2 women moved in together, which people termed a Boston marriage, which was used to describe 2 women living together independent of financial support from a man. On September 3, 1902, Jewett was injured in a carriage incident which ended her career. She spent the last 7 years of her life suffering from spinal concussion, which led to her death in 1909 at the age of 60. Her literary importance arises from her careful, if subdued, vignettes of country life that reflect a contemporary interest in local color rather than plot. Jewett fused brilliantly her interest in rural community, female friendship, the making of art, and the structure of narrative. The Town Poor is a perfect example of her appreciation for local color and female relationship. This story is about 2 women who go to visit 2 other women who have been moved into an old barn by the select men of the village. It is a fictional representation of events and life experiences that occurred in her hometown. This is the scene where Mandana, sitting on the trunk, begins to sob loudly while her older sister stands over her and tries to comfort her. While Mrs. Trimble watches, she begins to feel sad, which gives her a strong urge to help them and do something about this sad situation. Mary E. Wilkins Freeman was born on October 31st, 1852, in a small New England town of Randolph, Massachusetts. Her father was Warren Wilkins, who was a house carpenter, and her mother was Eleanor Wilkins, and she had a younger sister and a younger brother. Sadly, her brother died at the age of 3. In Randolph, Massachusetts, she met Mary John Wales, who would become her lifelong friend. At age 15, they moved to Brattleboro, Vermont, because her father became a partner at a dry goods shop. There, she attended Brattleboro High School. The move to Brattleboro, Vermont proved to have a profound influence on Freeman's future career as an author. Many afternoons following high school, she would spend hours gleaning over books in Steen's bookstore. Her love for literature would later encourage her to try her hand at writing. She graduated from Brattleboro High School in 1870 and spent 1 unhappy year at Mount Holyoke Female Seminary. She apparently fell in love with a man named Tyler Hanson, but their relationship didn't last, possibly due to a series of difficulties. Her father's dry goods store went out of business, and her younger sister passed away. Her family had to move into the house of Hanson Tyler's father, where her mother worked as the Reverend Tyler's housekeeper, and her father did lawn work. Her mother died suddenly in 1880, and 3 years later her father died. She found herself alone and impoverished, so in 1883 Freeman moved back to Randolph to live with her childhood friend Mary Wales. What saved her from her sadness was her literary success. Children's poems in local magazine brought in small sums. In 1883, she won a $50 prize offered by a leading Boston magazine for adult fiction. And that same year, Harper's Bazaar sent her $25 with an encouraging acceptance letter. Freeman's passion for writing intensified as she began to garner praise and literary following. In 1892, Freeman met Dr. Charles Freeman, and the two got engaged in 1897, although they postponed the wedding for a few years. At the age of 49 in 1902, she finally married Dr. Charles Freeman. They made their home in Metuchen, New Jersey. He was very supportive of her writing, but a few years later, in 1909, he entered a sanitarium for alcoholism. And in 1922, the two obtained a legal separation, and a year later, Charles died in 1923. She was recognized for her literary works in the 1920s. On April 23, 1926, she was awarded the William Dean Howells Medal for Distinction in Fiction. She was also one of the first women to be elected to membership in the National Institute of Arts and Letters. When she died at age 78, she had published 20 volumes of adult fiction, as well as 6 volumes of children's stories. In some of her stories, Freeman explored the rebellions and triumphs of seemingly meek women, depicting their strategies for gaining and maintaining control over their domestic situations with humor and sensitivity. She provided unflinching portraits of both the difficulties of spinsterhood and the often oppressive power dynamics that structured 19th century marriage. The Revolt of Mother is a perfect example of this. In the story, the mother decides to move the family into the brand new barn that the father had built because she was tired of living in her old rundown house that they had been living in for the past 45 years. In this scene, the father is returning from his trip with a new horse he had purchased. He walks to the barn, surprised to see his family in there with everything from their house, and the family explains to him that this is where they are going to live now.